Welcome to the Start Well podcast. I'm Dawn Thomas, your host. As a mother, financial advisor, and researcher, I know the importance of empowering young people on their financial journeys. Whether you're a parent, grandparent, or the coolest aunt or uncle, join me in exploring how impactful conversations about money can shape a young person's future. Let's harness their superpower of time and your superpower of influence to ensure they start well and continue to live well into the future. The information discussed in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into account your personal and financial objectives and situation. Before acting on any information discussed here, you should consider its appropriateness, having regard to your objectives, needs, and financial position. Welcome to the very first episode of Season 2 of the Start Well podcast. Thank you for joining us on this very special International Women's Day episode. And we're very lucky to have Jenny Rolfe-Wallace on the show. Welcome, Jenny.
Hi, Dawn.
So, Jenny, before we roll in, I'm going to have to make you blush a bit because I'm going to introduce you to our audience. Now, a number of people will know of you, but for the ones not familiar with your work, and it's very expansive, I'm just going to get them up to speed. If we could even summarize all the wonderful things you do. So Jenny is an award-winning financial education specialist and community advocate whose work helps people, especially women, so that's why you've been asked on this episode, rethink money in everyday life. She's the creator and host of the acclaimed podcast, It's Not About the Money, and was recognized at the International Money Awareness and Inclusion Awards. So she won that award for Australia. Well done, Jenny. For its impact in making financial conversations accessible and relevant. Jenny brings deep insight from her years in education and community leadership into discussions about financial well-being, gender equality, and practical strategies for everyday household. In 2025, she stood as a community-backed independent candidate for the federal seat of Riverina, driven by a desire to put people first in shaping policy and public life. And I believe that in you 100%, Jenny, from everything I've known about you. And her podcast, which we will put links to and also reference in this episode, digs beneath the numbers to explore how social norms, life events, and systems shape the way families, careers, and communities experience money. Perfect listening for anyone wanting to nurture confidence and clarity in household money conversations. So that's you, Jenny. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn.
Does it stun you that you've done so much? Or does it stun you? Does it still surprise you when someone is relaying it back to you?
I think because in my mind, there's still so much I want to do. There's still projects I'm working on, and there's still so much that I want to achieve. So it is quite funny. I suppose it's like when you're renovating a house or doing any sort of project and you just focus on what's ahead of you and you forget about all the work that's behind you and everything you've done. Sometimes it's good to stop and reflect back, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, I feel that you've been very consistent. I see a lot of what you post on LinkedIn. I suppose you post on other platforms as well. But what I notice is that you're consistent with your message. You're consistent with reaching out to the community and also educating the community as well. Like that's never wavered. And that consistency for me is an indication that someone she really believes in, what they're telling us about. I think social media, people get accused of, virtue signaling or doing something for likes. I believe that you're really generating change. So on that note, most recently, you ran in the elections. Jenny, how did that become? Because, from someone who passionately believes about lifting the outcomes of people in the community, that's a huge step. If you could tell our listeners and let us into your world as to how that happened.
Look, I have always been politically active. I enrolled to vote on my 18th birthday, and I believe it's really important to use our position and our privilege to amplify voices and to talk about issues and to create change. I think we're here on this earth to create a better society and a better world and a better economy, and we should be lifting others up. I think it's like that saying, a rising tide lifts all boats. So that's something that's been driving me since I was very young, and I attribute that to the household that I grew up in, where there was a lot of focus on making the world a better place, on that social contract. However, never in my wildest dreams did I ever think I'd run for federal Parliament, and certainly not last year. But we had an active group. You may have heard of the Voices for movement. It started in Indi when Cathy McGowan was first elected. She was elected, and then Helen Haynes is currently the representative in that electorate down in Victoria. And that was driven through a community desire to get somebody elected and independent who genuinely was driven by the community needs. And so our local group put out a call in November 2024.
Wow.
I shared it with lots of people who I thought would be fantastic, and several of them came back and went, "So you're going to do this, aren't you?" And I went, "Don't be ridiculous." And then after about the fifth person, I went, "Tell me why you think I should do this." And all of the reasons that they said, and I said, "This is, look, I'm far too blunt. I'm far too opinionated. I'm far too not built for political games. I don't believe in playing games. I'm a teller, not a seller." And her response was, "You're straightforward and unwavering." And I went, "Oh, okay, maybe I could roll with that." And so I put myself forward. It was a community selection process, and based on that selection, the community endorsed me to run as the community-backed independent. And I have to say, it was the most joyful, delightful privilege, I think one of the most in my professional career, of the opportunity to get out and listen to people and meet people and hear about the things that mattered. We got to talk about things like tax reform and housing affordability and, genuine economic reform, which I'm really passionate about, in the context of, people having genuine questions and concerns and issues in their local area. Now, Riverina is 52,000 square kilometres, so it is one of the biggest in Australia, and it is so incredibly diverse. But what I discovered is we all have so much in common. It doesn't matter how different we are. We want to be safe. We want to be loved. We want to know that we have work and that our kids are going to be okay and that we have a good community to live in. We just sometimes differ about our perspective of how we go about doing that. And, it's magic having conversations with people and finding out why people see things the way they do, to dig into those different perspectives. It was an absolute joy. And I was very sad when it came to an end in May. And I was not successful. I wasn't elected. But gosh, I had a fantastic volunteer campaign team. I had amazing community members in that team and surrounding, and it was just a pleasure.
Well, congratulations anyway for putting yourself forward. But that puts you as well. We're not going to waste any of the conversations that you've had, because if you could boil this down to your learnings and also the whole magic wand concept. Okay, if you could wave a magic wand to fix some of the things that are happening in Australia right now for young women, older women as a whole, this podcast is really aimed for parents and grandparents or guardians, anyone that have young people in their life. They're trying to help them, create that journey that is more empowered for them moving forward. I think they would be interested to know what are some of the things maybe systematically it's happening now that's pushing, particularly women behind. And if you had that magic wand, what would you wave to try and fix that?
We don't have a society without an economy, but we don't have an economy without society. They're so interlinked. And things like funding primary prevention of family and domestic violence and gendered violence against women, that is actually really important, because that harms people, but it also costs us economically. There is so much money that is drained through legal enforcement, through healthcare, through court systems, through counselling and other services for women and children who have experienced family and domestic violence. If we can stop that at the start, that would make a dramatic difference to people's lives and also benefit us economically. Housing security is really, really important, and that fundamentally ties down to tax reform. So much of what we talk about where we have social issues can be addressed through really solid tax reform. And I don't mean by that taxing individuals more. In fact, individuals absolutely carry the burden of our tax system. But we have a lot of problems with our federal budget and with our tax system, that there isn't enough money being raised through taxes to meet all of the things that need to be paid for, like giving the state money for hospitals, for schools, for roads, and so on. But we have a really narrow tax base. If we could actually solve that and make the big end of town pay more of their fair share, that would actually mean we have money to fund services available in the community. If we address some of the tax issues that have taken housing away from being about a roof over our head into wealth creation. And that is problematic because it means that housing security is out of reach for so many people, whether we're talking about renting or whether we're talking about buying. I would fix the superannuation system. I love super. I think it is fantastic. I think I didn't at the time when it was introduced in 1992, but I think it is one of the master strokes of good financial and economic policy in Australia. But it is a system that was built by men for men, and it benefits people who basically enter the workforce, work their whole life, have regular contributions as an employee, and hit their peak earnings in their 40s and 50s. Now, women, we are paid less thanks to the gender pay gap. We have more breaks in our work pattern because of caring responsibilities that we're socialised to carry. There is this social expectations, the burden falls to women. Changing that would be great. The cost of childcare is phenomenal, even though we have had significant changes in the childcare system. So super is fantastic, but women get less of the tax concessions because we are lower income earners, because we have lower balances. And there are some very, very simple things that could be done to make that fairer. And I think, just really looking at things from a lens of equity and equality, because it's not just about women, it's about all marginalised people who don't sit at the position of power and privilege. And that's why we need to have these conversations.
Jenny, it sounds like there's so much to fix. And I know from a financial advisor's perspective, I kind of go by what happens legislatively that's going to change, because we're constantly preparing for, it could be scenario A or scenario B. I feel that change happens quite slowly as an observer of things. And I suppose if we take away, I know when talking about productivity and not going crazy, you're focusing on the things that you can change as opposed to the things you can't change. I admire the fact that you've put yourself forward trying to advocate for the change, and you will do that every day. But if we're thinking about households now, you've outlined some systematic challenges that are there. What can be done from a household level to be able to navigate some of this? So acknowledging that, there's things that need to be fixed, but it could be really slow moving, and your daughters are growing. What can we do?
I think having conversations that we actually exist in this system is really important. Acknowledging there are things like gender pay gaps is a start. It is a thing. It is real. I've had so many conversations in the past year of people that don't believe it. And I'm like, go and have a look at the ABS statistics. Go and have a look at the WGEA website. It's all there. The gender pay gap is a thing. And if women are aware of that, if girls are aware of that, it's not just about steering girls into other occupations and saying, you should go into engineering and STEM because they're higher paid. They are higher paid. But what we know is from when women enter those industries, from the moment they leave university, there is a gender pay gap in those industries. So it's not all up to the individual. But if we have an awareness that this is the environment we're operating in, be aware of that and understand that that means that you need to be more of an advocate for yourself. Now, there's also a myth that women don't ask for pay rises, that women are bad at negotiating pay. That is not true. The research tells us that when women are more likely to ask for pay rises, and when they do so, they're more likely to go in with a prepared business case. This is the value I add to the business, but they're more likely to be knocked back. So if we know that that is an issue, us being in the workforce as parents, looking to change that for our kids, but also making sure that the kids in our lives are aware of that this is actually the system that you're working in. You are not in a vacuum. You need to be prepared and extra prepared as a woman to navigate this space. I think if we're preparing them for the real world, but then also working to change that reality at the same time. And I do see younger generations coming through with a lot more confidence, with a lot more willingness to challenge. And that's exciting because I do think we will get that change. I think it is a generational thing. It will eventually shift. But also our responsibility. If we're out there in the workforce, we need to be creating a better environment for the subsequent generations as well. We need to be challenging policies that might result in that disadvantage. We need to be advocates for change to pave the way for those generations that are following as well. I will add something as well. Being aware in our homes of the unconscious biases of how we interact in the financial space with our kids, because we know that even when we pocket money or assigning jobs, that we often unconsciously reflect gendered patterns in that. So really stepping and thinking, what is the messaging that's happening in my house? And how can I proactively change it if it's not the message I want to send?
Yes. So fantastic things that you've outlined there, Jenny. There's a few points. So I'm gathering my thoughts as to what I want to pick up there. The conversation about girls in STEM. This is a conversation that happens in my household. And this might be of interest to our audience. Okay. Because I'm looking at it from the stats, from a financial advisor's point of view. Okay, I understand that younger people now are not going to do the uninterrupted working life till 60 because they feel, why do all of that and not live your life? Get it? And I told my kids that there's a trade-off. If that's the life that they want and they want to follow their passion, I would say that that timeline between 20 to 30 is really important with generating wealth because we're talking about the compounding effect of investing, right? So when I've gone to my son, the eldest, my daughter's the middle, and I've got the youngest, talk to them about jobs. My daughter, her initial job selections did not fit into the STEM profile. And I've kind of told her, you've got to consider this because there is funding, scholarships, things that are encouraging women into the field, but you're going to end up with, a decent wage, which allows you to then put money away, and then you can do whatever you want in your life later on in life. Do you think, how do you feel about that? I feel like some parents might think that's counter to what their kids want. But from a financial advisor, understand that the moment you're not earning initially and investing, that's going to cut out opportunities down the track.
There is so much in that. And, as a parent, when you're looking at your kids and you want to guide them down a path, and it's that balance, isn't it, between gently pushing them in one direction versus nurturing them and their interests and their passions. I think that is a really interesting balance broadly because that balance between being a parent and nurturing your kids versus you can't put old heads on young shoulders, right? But we can open their eyes to alternatives, and they might end up going down their own path anyway. But if we can actually say to them, there are so many other options. I don't think we talk enough to our kids about business, about being an entrepreneur. We often, particularly in schools, talk about, preparing them for employed work. But actually, we should be encouraging our kids in entrepreneurial thinking, because if we actually want to think about what gives you the greatest capacity for building wealth, it's often through entrepreneurship and often through businesses. And there are some kids out there who would be amazing business owners and entrepreneurs, not necessarily employees. I think it's having the broad conversations, but also none of us want to be doing a job that we hate. Having said that, as someone who has had a portfolio career and, I haven't had a linear path, I've gone from one thing to another, all interrelated and all driven by my values and my passions and my interests and desire to make the world a better place. I think if we can at least encourage our children to follow their values and what's important to them, money and financial security is important, but how many people drag themselves out of bed to go to a job that they absolutely hate, but it puts food on the table? I think this is part of a broader conversation around how do we fulfill ourselves and thrive as individuals, because it is about all of the aspects of us, not just work. But if we can instill good financial habits, it doesn't matter how much you're earning if you're spending it all. Likewise, you can be earning less and saving and investing in a very savvy way. And I think I would tend to lean towards those conversations rather than pushing my kids down a path that brings them no joy.
No, which, look, I value that perspective. Lacey Philippich brought up her experience, in her book regarding what she was able to do when she was paid actually higher than her friends when she was starting out. Because I think in her book, she had talked about, in her book, Money School, she talked about the fact she got an accreditation to be a gym teacher, I think gymnastics teacher, something along those lines, which was paying a higher per hour rate than working at McDonald's. And it's a lesson that stuck in my head, because from the perspective of a financial advisor, we know cash flow management is the key to actually shuffle money in the right places. But of course, if there's more cash flow for you to play with, and that gives you maybe a social life as well as putting money investment away, I think it's maybe framing that conversation. Sometimes, I have to check myself and go, am I being like this hard, immigrant mom coming to Australia and telling my kids, this is what you're going to do because I see the practicality of it? And it's that way up of, would you want to be in a job you're not passionate about for 40 years before 60? Or would you want to do the hard yards to set yourself up for 10 years and give yourself a head start to then look at in your 30s? Look, maybe there's no right answer, but I think that conversation needs to be there at home. Is that sort of what you're feeling as well, Jenny?
Yeah, it's the conversation that's important. It's about the possibilities. It's about the pros and the cons. It's informed decisions are the best decisions. And the other thing is you can start down a path. Lacey also talks about, reversible decisions. You go down a path, you change your mind. You can always divert and change. So I think that's the other thing for younger people. Their career paths are going to look very, very different to our generations, or, particularly older generations, especially those that work the one job forever. They are going to have, there are so many careers that don't even exist yet, that because, the technology hasn't developed or the need hasn't developed. I think being prepared to take risks sometimes, give things a go. If it doesn't work for you, make a change. Look at the opportunities. Don't ever be too afraid to try, I think is really important as well. But essential to all of this is the conversations around the money management and the making good money decisions regardless of the path, and understanding that the choices you make, opportunity cost, right? I love it as an economic concept. The fact that there is always an alternative, a great alternative that you're giving up to take one particular path. Being aware of what those alternatives are, what the options are. And I say this as someone who, when I was younger, worked 3 jobs because, I grew up in a very financially disadvantaged household. So for me, building financial security was such a priority. I wanted to know I had money in the bank if I needed it, that I could pay my bills. I worked so hard when I was younger. And you talk about that window between 20 and 30. I am so thankful that I was the person I was in my 20s and 30s because I worked so hard. But I actually had to learn to not work. So for me, I'm layering that when I'm having conversations with my kids. I'm also conscious that my drive to achieve financial security was born out of my childhood experiences. They're not in the same situation. They have different choices. And I want them to realize there is a whole world out there of possibilities. And if they can align their choices to their values and make good money decisions, that to me is a win.
I think that's a very balanced view. And I think of parents, grandparents, people with they have access to young people in their lives. Like I said, there's no one fit because there's a lot of factors that play in it. But I think the key point that's consistent, even in your podcast, is about starting those conversations. I think if you're having the conversations, you understand the options. Another point you had raised before was around pay negotiation. My observation, so this is not research backed, but my observation navigating to the financial services industry is that I've seen men negotiate because they're willing to go in pretty hard, where they'll say, if you're not going to give me this, I'm leaving. And my observation is that as women, we fall to that bit of stability. I know that I would not do that. Like, I wouldn't want to play a game of chicken to be able to negotiate something like that. It would be that I'll be triggered to move because it's not tenable to actually be in a spot anymore, rather than making very conscious decisions on how that cash flow could be improved. How can that work? Like, I don't know. I'm trying not to say or tell our daughters to be able to go into a workplace and play this game of chicken and try and negotiate harder the way that maybe a man would, because we should be able to respect how they perform. But looking at the statistics, and this is research backed, there is going to be a huge need for workers in any industry coming up. They've got that on their hands. So that's one thing for us. Yay. How would you recommend that our listeners approach that conversation of negotiation with their daughters or the young women in their lives?
Firstly, we need to be told to value ourselves. Our entire society undervalues women and undervalues the work of women. And that's whether it's paid work or whether it's unpaid work. So we have, over generations, internalized this message that our contribution is somehow less than. And so if we actually reflect and go, what value do I actually bring? Women have, whether in the workforce or not, an amazing skill set. Generalizing here, but we are socialized to be community builders. We are socialized to be great communicators. We have job-specific skills that we've no doubt developed, and knowledge as well, whether that's through formal or informal training. It can be really confronting to look in the mirror and look at yourself and value yourself for who you actually are and your skills and your knowledge and your expertise. Like, we're not allowed to say, I'm really good at this. Because then you're big noting yourself. Women are not encouraged to take up space. Girls are not encouraged to talk about how good they are at something, where we're taught to be humble, and we don't do it in the same way to boys or to men. And so I think we need to look at that socialization aspect, that we are not taught to value ourselves. And so if we are not valuing ourselves and society isn't valuing us, how on earth do we value ourselves economically? And I think it does go back to that. So, stop, look in the mirror and go, I am really good at this. If, it's somebody who's primarily doing work in the home, unpaid work in the home, if we actually look at the value that contributes, you'd be looking at $100,000 for the cooking, the cleaning, the childcare, and all the rest of it. That work is valuable. It's valuable economically. It's valuable socially. We need to value ourselves. That is my starting point. Teach your daughters to value themselves. Teach them that they have value as humans, as well as what they bring economically. And as I said, the research that said women go in with a business case prepared, they've done the numbers about what they're actually worth. And they use that in negotiation. They're more likely to be knocked back. We need to change the workforce so that doesn't happen. That's, again, a long-term change thing. But yeah, we need to value ourselves to start with. And then if you can do that, it gives you a confidence of, I am worth this. And you know what? If your employer and your workplace doesn't value what you bring, then find somewhere that does. And that is actually really hard for women to do, because generally speaking, there is not that value of women's work. And it might change individual to individual, but as a broad society and economy, we value men's work more than we do women's work. That's why we have a gender pay gap.
And again, you're back to that theme of it starts at home. conversations. These are ongoing because I suppose, we're so trained with social media and news articles. They're always quick fixes. It's like, here's the 3 tips to get ahead and be fine. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And if the work is done up front, it's going to show that benefit. What you're saying about even the terminology about valuing work, had new clients actually come in, and something I picked up in a meeting that made me feel I really want to work with them. She made this comment, "Oh, I haven't been working for a few years." And her husband said, "No, you just haven't been paid for it. You've been working really hard." And I'm just meant, "Oh, give this man a trophy. Give this man a trophy." And I looked on my summary sheet. Of course, I noted down, they have 2 daughters. And if this is the kind of language that's effortlessly, I didn't say anything during that meeting because it's more that, we're picking up cues and we're looking at how dynamics are. And I just went, if you're doing this here and you're making sure that you're engaging that idea of value and you're having young women around that, like those are the small little things where they pick up and they understand the value. So that's a huge point that you're making there. And I was just, sorry, I just had to share that because that made me so joyful to see.
My heart leapt when you said that too, because imagine if that was just the norm of how we saw the unpaid work that happens usually in the home and domestic settings. Imagine that. We would have such a mental shift in our society. That's the key to creating change.
Jenny, because again, the opening statement talked about systematically what you've seen in your experience and also running as an independent. Talked about a few things: housing security, domestic abuse, that value of safety that links in quite well to what UN Australia's International Women's Theme is this year. Okay, so the theme is balance the scales. So if anyone wants to know more about the theme, we encourage people to look at UN Women Australia's theme as opposed to the corporate themes that come up with things that are a bit more catchy with hashtags. This is what's on their website. Despite decades of progress, barriers to justice remain deeply entrenched. 1 in 3 women worldwide will experience physical or sexual violence in their lifetime, yet most will never seek formal help or justice. Across Australia, conviction rates for sexual assault cases remains persistently low, with the latest New South Wales figures revealing just an 11% conviction rate, underscoring the immense gap between legal protections and real outcomes for survivors. And the theme promises, it's a promise to women out there and girls to be safe, heard, and free to shape their own future. And in 2026, is looking at, unjust laws, policies, and ingrained barriers that still stand in the way of fair and inclusive communities. So this is what the theme is calling for. We know not everything can be fixed in the short term, but there is a linkage between things like housing security, sexual violence, all of that are linked. It sounds like it's a really huge thing to undertake, but if we bring it back to the households, again, what can an individual do about this in honor of International Women's Day and making a promise to our girls and women out there?
Rosie Batty famously said that not all disrespect ends in violence, but all violence begins with disrespect. It's one of the simplest things to stop violence at the start is to build a culture of respect in the home. And that reflects back to, the conversation with your client where he acknowledged the unpaid work and domestic labour of his partner. Genuine respect. When one woman in Australia is murdered every 7 to 10 days, that's the tip of the iceberg. There are so many things that are happening in workplaces, in schools, in homes, on the street. The sexist jokes, the memes that go around, that they are incredibly harmful because it adds to a culture of denigrating women. And it's not just a joke. If your joke lies in the harm or the denigration of an individual, particularly because of their gender or because of their race or because of their religion, it's not funny. There are 1,000 ways to be funny that doesn't denigrate people. And I think that's the beginning, right? That's the tip. These one-liners, these comments, these offhand things that reflect disrespect. And one of the most powerful ways to create immediate change is when men call out other men. Women have been talking about this stuff for literally decades, but men listen to other men in a way because it's so easy to dismiss a woman's experience. Oh, you're overreacting. You can't take a joke. But when men call it out, you can see other men going, oh, that's not okay. The culture thrives in silence, in awkward silences where people don't speak up. And we need allies, male allies, to actually draw the line in the sand and go, this is not okay. At the workplace, in the footy club, during the round of golf, or whatever the activity is, those comments are made, and they're made every day, and they are made to an audience of men who hear them. And I would love to see more men step up. And I know that's very, very uncomfortable, but it's like building a muscle. If you have respect for the women in your life, if you have respect for your daughters, your mothers, your aunties, your friends, then you owe it to them to go, mate, come on, that's not okay. And, you know, Our Watch is an organisation that has some fantastic videos designed to help people become allies, to equip them. Everyday, ordinary situations, things that you can say, things that you can do. You don't have to be a party pooper, but you also don't have to be complicit through your silence. And so my wish when it comes to International Women's Day is that more men get involved and more men step up as allies. Because if that happened, we would get change. It's a men's problem, and we need men to solve it.
Well, that's a big message there. And for some people, it might be a smaller change. And for others, it could be a bit more challenging. Because I think your message, Jenny, is that if you are one of our allies, you haven't stepped into allyship yet, to help the young women in your life is actually standing up to ensure that their value is recognized. And in the situations where they are devalued, those messages get absorbed by them, and it leads into things like, tolerating situations that they actually don't deserve, whether it's coming down to being paid less or being in relationships that are not treating them well. So, Jenny, those are really important points. I think part of it with International Women's Day, I think stepping away from the hard truth of why we're having it, does it disservice? And I think if some of our audience finds this a little bit, it's heavy. It's not that it's heavy, it's just that it's the reality that we're working off. And we really want, the generation of girls coming through to have a better experience than what current women have. That's all we're doing. Jenny, aside from, what can be done in the households in terms of, systematically what's happening and what's there, you have interacted with a number of resources, as an educator for your podcast research. You're also a genuine lover of books. Can you share some of those resources? Because I think you could name like hundreds of resources, but for our podcast audience, they may be just a bit time poor. If there were six resources, whether they're books or podcasts or links, what would you recommend?
We've mentioned one, Money School by Lacey Fuller-Pitch. That is one of my favorite go-to books. I think it is absolutely fantastic. I think one of the most powerful books that really opened my eyes to the structures and the systems of disadvantage is a book called Invisible Women. And it kind of looks at how women have been left out of the design of policies and the implications of that. It's a brilliant book and quite easy to read. Along those lines, there is another book called Who Cooked Adam Smith's Dinner? Now, Adam Smith was the father of economics, wrote a book called Wealth of Nations. And this is a book by a woman who is an economist who really delves into the labour of women behind that. She's also written a book called The Mother of Invention, which is similar to Invisible Women. I suppose lifts a veil on perhaps things that we don't always see in our everyday life. But when you sit back, go, that makes so much sense. And it really opens this Pandora's box of why we have such inequity and disadvantage experienced, not just by women, but marginalised people generally. So I think it's really good to open our eyes. I'm going to add in a couple more. Stop Fixing Women by Catherine Fox is a great book. She also has one called Breaking the Boss Bias. And another one that probably is a little bit different is called Kids Ain't Cheap by Anna Christina. And it's, designed for young families who might have just had children or who have young children or who are planning to have children. But what I love about Anna's book is she looks at some of the systemic issues around that disparity of unpaid work and mental load and financial implications for women. And I love that book from that perspective. It's not just you need to save, for these particular things, or you can access these benefits. It looks at things like having a conversation about how is the work going to be shared between people. And I love that book for that reason.
We had Anna actually on and Startwell in season 1, but it's a really good reminder. I'm such a big fan of hers. And it helped me, again, reminding me of another positive interaction. So this, okay, we've talked about hard stuff, but there's a positive interaction. Another new client inquiry came through, and both members of the couple had reduced their hours together to look after the child. And I just said to them, I said, you don't understand how unusual it is for me to see this. And I got really excited for them because I think in practice, it's not very common, but to actually see someone in their line without they've come to the point where they made those decisions, gave me hope that, what we talk about, like we're talking about things now, that's whether or not it's going to be implemented. So that conversation piece about roles, how we divide it, so important and so powerful.
And we know that actually there are benefits for kids and there are benefits for fathers if we're talking about a heteronormative couple. We know that because of the experience of other countries. There's been lots of research, particularly done in Scandinavian countries, where both parents will take more time in that hands-on caregiving. There are health benefits, there are mental health benefits, there are economic benefits. It is actually a win-win, and that's really exciting. It should be much more normalised.
But there's hope. There's glimmers of hope where there's change. We know that our audience here will be taking on lessons now. We're going to round off our podcast shortly. You can find Jenny in various platforms, and her podcast is available on all major podcasts. So it's not just about the money podcast, but I would recommend just following Jenny in any case. And Jenny, you'd be pretty open if someone approached you with further questions and picking your brain.
Yep, sure thing.
And to just take us away from this topic, because I understand it can feel heavy for certain people. Not everyone listens to a podcast wanting to feel the weight of the world. They're wanting to feel that it's actionable and they're in control. Is there anything you want to leave us with, Jenny, that can help them feel that after tuning off from this, there are things that they can actually do to make that change?
I would firstly say to anybody who listened to this and maybe felt a bit uncomfortable about anything that was said, that's not necessarily a bad thing. The magic happens when we get outside of our comfort zone, and sometimes that means we're confronting unconscious biases or heuristics that we've lived with but haven't necessarily thought about. And I think it's a really great question to think about why. Why do we feel that way? And explore that, because that's where we can learn and grow and change. We can evolve. We don't have to just stay where we were. To anybody that is feeling uncomfortable because we've discussed things like family and domestic violence, remember there are amazing support services available like 1300 Respect. And if you're in Victoria, WIRE has made, that's Women's Information Resource, WIRE, has some amazing resources as well, or your local women's health centre where you can get some support. But I think I'm actually really positive and hopeful for the future. I interact with a lot of young people, and I love that they are really questioning so much, and they just seem to be so much more aware of things than when I was younger, and they have access to so much information. So our role is often in helping them filter that information, and I think that is, again, where it comes back to really getting them to think about what's important to them, what are their values, How do they want to live their life according to those values? I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I actually think it is really exciting, and we need to let kids know that it's really exciting. We don't have to have all the solutions, but we can have conversations. We can find out answers together. We can admit to kids, oh, I don't actually know that. And I think that's really exciting. Go on the journey with your kids. That's an exciting thing to do as well.
Thank you so much, Jenny. I think it's, like I said, it's if we're going to do an International Women's Day episode, we have to be talking about the real challenges that are out there. But the hope is that, if we are in a position to have those conversations with young people, that's going to give them a better footing moving forward, and also looking at our own actions and how we are appearing in the household and workplace. You've given us a lot to think about, and I will put your full list in there. Honestly, I could go ages talking to you, Jenny, because there's other things I didn't ask you about that I wanted to. So we might just have to have you back the next time we do an International Women's Day podcast for Start Well. And thank you so much for being on.
Thank you, Dawn. It is always a delight talking to you.
In the spirit of reconciliation, I acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connection to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Start Well and investing in the financial empowerment of young people. Please refer to the show notes for resources and links discussed in this episode. Subscribe now to get notified of the latest episodes as they drop weekly. And visit us on the Wealth Designer Start Well page for further resources to continue your knowledge journey.